You're listening to the Renegade Blitz, the best podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at @RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. Read articles on RenegadeBlitz.com, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app.
And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz. I'm Ty Polk with Chris Ward and Brandon Walker, back with you to talk Steelers versus Broncos this weekend. And first, you're noticing the new intro for the Renegade Blitz. We've had a fellow Point Park alumni with us who was in school with us, Bill Steinbach. That's the new voice. Check out Bill's podcast, the A-Main Podcast, a motorsports podcast covering major racing in the United States. He focuses on NASCAR, dirt, and local racing in Pennsylvania, along with his co-host, Matt Allen. And again, Bill, we thank you so much for the new intro, new outro, and of course the podcast intro clips as well. We wanted to switch things up because, this is the 61st episode of the Renegade Blitz. We've been running for a long time, guys.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought when we first started, we knew that we were going to do a podcast, do the recaps and stuff, but I never really thought, I didn't have in mind when we started that we'll be doing interviews with all these writers from across the country that cover all these teams. So it's been really good.
Yeah, I'm glad I joined in. This is probably the best decision I've made in my career so far in about a good 2-3 years, man, because it was just me, you, and Todd. It was me and you, Chris, doing it for about 4 or 5 years. We was just going on Facebook, and we got the voice, and he brought it all together.
Yeah, it's definitely it's been a good ride here. Just really good talking about the Steelers, and we really enjoy the interviews with all the writers, and we really appreciate George coming on the podcast and taking time to talk with us.
Don't spoil it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we'll cut that part, but don't worry. It's just I want to make sure that we put it in first. But yeah, fuck it. And guys, there's so much to talk about this week with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course, they're still trying to figure out the blame game for the fourth week in a row now about what's going on with the Steelers offense and things like that. And there's a lot more we could talk about. There's also Aaron Rodgers still waxing poetic about the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's kind of poetic justice with the Broncos coming into town because they're another team that are vying for the services of Aaron Rodgers, along with the Raiders and who knows, any other mystery teams coming to the forefront.
Yeah, like a certain team in the NFC East is probably roaming around and just sniffing at the hairs of Aaron Rodgers. Don't want to mention that team, but we'll see.
Stop pimping Washington on the podcast. But
I might have been talking about the Giants. You see Daniel Jones play lately? Have you seen? We can talk about Philly. Have you seen Jalen Hurts? He ain't that impressive. You see? You just making assumptions. You know what it takes. Just making assumptions.
Wow. But yeah, there's a lot of services vied for that, and of course we appreciate everything about that. Yeah, we kind of talked a lot about Aaron Rodgers right there. That's the last time we're going to mention it until Aaron Rodgers officially comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers or goes elsewhere. We promise. We're done with the Packers now. But, Chris, it's time to talk about the odds from Odd Sharks.
Yeah, they have the Steelers as 1-point favorites against the Broncos, and the over-under is 40 points. So that's interesting there, 1-point favorite there. Really pretty much a toss-up game. The total has gone under in 5 of the Broncos' last 6 games, and Denver's 6-1-2 against the spread in their last 9 games against Pittsburgh. Denver 6-0 against the spread in its last 6 games against sub-500 teams, and the Steelers are 2-8 against the spread in its last 10 versus plus 500 teams.
All right, so let's keep that all in mind as we'll give our predictions for this game a little bit later on. But now it's time to find out more about the Denver Broncos with our next guest. And we welcome to the podcast George Stoia. He covers the Broncos for the Denver Gazette. George, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to it.
Well, George, the Steelers are now at 1-3, and this Sunday's game is a real must-win for them. And the Broncos are on the opposite side of the spectrum at 3-1 and are coming off a loss to the Ravens. Denver's 3 wins have come against the Giants, the Jaguars, and the Jets, who have a combined record of 2-10. What is the overall feeling in Denver about this Broncos team?
Hey, yeah, it's an interesting feeling, right? I think both these teams are kind of in interesting situations because I know that obviously the Steelers are, like you said, in a must-win game. I would argue I don't know if the Broncos are in a must-win game since they are sitting at 3-1, but this is a big game for them because when you look at what happened this last week against the Ravens, that was a big missed opportunity, right? I mean, there was a lot of people around the league questioning, is this team for real? This team kept saying it's for real. Von Miller every week has been like, this is a different team than years past. And then they go out and kind of lay an egg against the Ravens and lose, their starting quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater to concussion. So I think the feeling right now is that they have something to prove. And the other feeling too is I don't think they're taking the Steelers lightly. I think that they got embarrassed this last week. And they feel like they can still go out and kind of prove themselves to the rest of the league this week against the win over the Steelers. And I know that the Steelers obviously maybe haven't been playing well, but they're still the Steelers. I mean, they're a respectable team around the league. They're well coached. They have good players, and it's on the road, right? So I think that that's kind of the approach that this team is taking is that they've still got a chance. And you look at, the upcoming games. They've got the Raiders the next week, which, they didn't look as good last night, but they're still – probably an above average team. And then they go to Cleveland on Thursday night in a quick turnaround game that I think we all kind of expect them to lose. So, this is a big game for them. I think that they, I wouldn't say it's a must win for the Broncos, but it's definitely an important game.
And Teddy Bridgewater suffered a concussion against the Ravens, and it's unknown as of right now if he'll play on Sunday. But up until getting injured, Bridgewater was really playing at a high level in Denver. Do you think he plays on Sunday? And if not, how do you feel about Drew Lock getting the start?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. I honestly, I have no idea. From the people that I've talked to, I know he's feeling a lot better Monday. But I don't think if he does play, he won't practice much this week because I think by rule, he's not able to be back on the field till I think Friday, maybe Thursday at the earliest. And so, obviously his preparation is not going to be the same, but if Drew Lock has to play, I don't have the most confidence in Drew, to say the least, especially after watching this last game. I think it was kind of clear why Teddy ended up winning that quarterback competition. If I had to guess, though, I think Teddy will play just based off his reaction after getting hit. He was, down on the field for a little bit, but got up, walked to the sideline, looked fine, looked like he wasn't, lost or anything like that. And then we actually saw him after the game on the field talking to family and friends as if he was okay. So that tells me it's definitely not like a serious concussion. But again, if he's having symptoms, then, he probably shouldn't play at all on Sunday, right? But if I had to guess, I think he will play. And as far as Drew, I would take the Steelers if Drew Lock is starting this game. But I also know, and maybe this is just Big Ben because he's older. It sounds like he has a hip injury this week. So I don't know if he's going to play. But, man, I really hope we don't get a Mason Rudolph versus Drew Lock battle on Sunday. That just won't be very much fun. So.
All right, we switch to the ground game. The Denver Broncos have a pretty good running back duo in Melvin Gordon and Devonte Williams. I saw that Williams had an impressive run against the Ravens where it took numerous Ravens defenders that took him down. The Steelers are missing one of the key pieces up front. And on Sunday against the Packers, Packers rushed for 131 yards. What are your thoughts on Gordon and Williams as a duo, and what do you think they will try to do to run the ball against the Steelers' defensive front, especially if Block gets the nod?
Yeah, the run game is so interesting with the Broncos right now because, they were running the ball well against the Ravens in the first half, and then they only ran the ball, I think, 4 or 5 times in the second half. They just went totally away from it. And I think that it's clear Melvin Gordon's a good back in the league. We all know that. He's a veteran guy. A lot of teams would want him. And then you have a rookie in Devonte Williams, like you said, had that huge run. And I think everybody here in Denver knows that he's the future at that position. But the problem is their offensive line's not very good. That's where the issue lies, really, with the entire offense. You watch that Ravens game, and they struggled up front the entire game. And obviously, the Ravens do some things differently in terms of going zero coverage and blitzing guys and all those things. But that's the problem with the Broncos' run game is they're down 2 starting guards right now, or they were this last week, and Graham Glasgow and Dalton Reisner, and they had to play a rookie in Quinn Miners, the Division III kid from Whitewater. And then Natani Mute, who's a 5th-round pick, or maybe it's a 6th-round pick 2 years ago, that has like little to zero experience. And so when that happens up front, you're not going to be able to run the ball very effectively. And I think that's kind of why they ended up going away from it, because the Ravens kind of figured it out there towards the end of the first half. So they went away from it in the second half. But it's a good run game when it's going. It's good, but they've had a lot of issues up front. And so I wouldn't say that you'll see a ton of it. I think that they'll probably stick with it a little bit longer because they are getting criticized pretty heavily by fans here, at least that they should have stuck with it longer against the Ravens. So I think you'll see it a little bit more. But again, the issue is they'll break some of these big runs and then they just get stuffed a lot. And that's mostly on the guys up front more so than obviously the 2 running backs. So I think everybody knows are pretty good running backs.
And let's talk about the Broncos receivers. Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, 2 of the young guys out there, are both on IR right now. So Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, and Deontay Spencer, who had a cup of coffee with the Steelers in training camp and preseason in 2019, are the top 3 wideouts. And, of course, they also have Noah Fant at tight end. Well, first of all, how are the Broncos dealing with the injuries to their receivers?
Yeah, I just mentioned the offensive line. The next issue is wide receiver. And you look at Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick. They're both 2 guys that I think everybody agrees are solid NFL receivers, especially, Sutton was a Pro Bowler just a couple of years ago. But obviously he's coming off his ACL injury. And at times he doesn't look, like his old self. I know he had the big breakout game against the Jaguars, but other than that, he hasn't really done anything. And he's yet to find the end zone. This season. So, and going back and watching, the tape this last week, neither of those guys really got a whole lot of separation. They've had issues doing that. And I think part of that reason is, teams know that they really don't have a 3rd wide receiver right now with, KJ Hamler going down with an ACL injury, and then Jeudy being out at least another probably 2 to 3 weeks with an ankle injury. And so they need to get Jeudy back. Jeudy will help this offense probably tremendously in terms of just getting open. And he was arguably the best player on the entire team during training camp. And so they need to get Jeudy back. But then you also talk about the tight ends. And I think that's where they need to get the ball more. And I think that was part of the emphasis. And then the Ravens kind of took that away. And I'm sure that the Steelers will be looking at the same things as, Noah Fant is, I think, one of the more underrated tight ends in the league in terms of his ability catching the ball down the field and making plays over the middle. And then you have Albert O, which I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, but it's Okwuegbunam, I believe, but everybody calls him Albert O, number 85. He's really good too. He's in his 3rd year. He's coming off second year. He's coming off an ACL injury, just like Sutton, and he's another guy that they rely heavily on, and you could see a lot in the passing game. So, it's really those 4: Sutton, Patrick, Fant, and Albert O. And then, they have Kendall Hinton, who you guys might be familiar with, but he was the guy that had to play quarterback last year when they had all those quarterbacks out against the Saints. He's stepped up and is playing some wide receiver. And then they also just recently signed David Moore, who played for the Seahawks for 4 years before being on the Raiders practice squad this last year. So I think he'll get a little bit more involved, but really it's those 4 guys that I mentioned.
And then you mentioned that the Broncos offensive line is struggling this year. But how's former Steelers offensive line coach Mike Munchak made an impact? I guess he has his hands full with this unit, but he was beloved by the Steelers offensive lineman when he was in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Munchak is one of the most respected coaches on staff for sure. He's a guy that I think everybody kind of trusts to figure it out on the offensive line. And really, I think part of the issue isn't really Munchak. It's more so, some of the hands that he's been dealt in terms of he's got a lot of young players, right? I mean, you look at the center, Lloyd Cushenberry. He's in his 2nd year. He started all 16 games last year as a rookie at center. He's still clearly figuring things out. And then when you take out, Graham Glasgow, who's played a lot of football at right guard, and Dalton Reisner at left guard, who's, in his, I think, 3rd or 4th year, and Cushenberry's next to a rookie. at right guard and then a second-year guy at left guard, it's going to be really hard. That communication on the interior line is not going to be very, very good. And then you look at the right tackle position. That's been a huge problem for them up front in recent years. And Bobby Massey comes in from Chicago, a veteran guy, but he's not a Pro Bowl level type player, right? I mean, he's just an average right tackle at best. And then you have Garrett Bowles, who's just one of the most inconsistent, offensive linemen at left tackle. I mean, he was so honestly just not good his first 3 years. Has a breakout year last year, was one of the better tackles in football, and then he's kind of reverted back to his old ways this year. He's really had a tough time. He gave up a couple sacks this last week against the Ravens, and so I mean, I think Munchak's done the best he could with this line, but it's hard to control when you have injuries and you just have honestly just a bunch of young guys and guys that really aren't top tier in terms of their position in the league.
And George, do you think those guards will be back this week?
Reisner will be. So the starting left guard, Dalton Reisner, or at least he's expected to be. Coach Vic Fangio said that yesterday, and I believe even Dalton Reisner's come out and said that on social media. So he'll be back. It'll be interesting, though. I don't think Graham Glasgow, who's their most veteran offensive lineman other than Massey, I do not think he'll be back this week. But it'll be interesting to see if they play the rookie and Quinn Miners, who I actually thought played pretty well against the Ravens, or Mute, who has a little bit more experience and, like I said, is in his second year.
All right, flipping to the defensive side of the ball, they do run a 3-4 just like the Pittsburgh Steelers do on the defensive front. They have Shelby Harris and Draymond Jones at their ends and Mike Purcell at nose tackle. How have the Broncos been at stopping the run, as the Steelers have really struggled to run the ball this season, being 33rd, second in the league, and really dating back the past couple years, and they haven't rushed for 100 yards as a team since week 11 last year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, they like you said, they run a 3-4, but they also run a 4-3 and a nickel look. They'll run that a lot, where they bring in an extra DB, at that nickel position. But the run defense has been really solid this year. I mean, even the Ravens. The big controversy this week was obviously the Ravens running that play at the end of the game to get to 100 yards rushing for, I don't know what it was, 43 straight games. And the Broncos were going to break that, right? I mean, they were at only 97 yards. And then obviously the Ravens are one of the better rushing teams in the league. So I think the rushing defense is really, really good. And that's really where I see this game maybe being decided is I think that the Broncos front seven is pretty damn good. And I know that the Steelers have kind of struggled with the run game and also protecting Ben Roethlisberger. I know that offensive line hasn't been the best this season. So I think it might be a tough day in terms of running the ball for the Steelers. But I would also say the Broncos have yet to face a running back as good as Najee Harris. So it should be an interesting matchup and see if Najee can, obviously make some plays and break tackles and make guys miss. But, when you talk about Von Miller up front, you've got Shelby Harris, like you said, who signed a big contract this offseason. Mike Purcell's playing the best football of his career. Draymond Jones as well is playing the best football of his career. And then you even got Malik Reed, who most people probably don't know, but is the backup to Bradley Chubb, who's, out for, 6 or 8 weeks with an ankle injury. But Malik Reed, for a lot of teams, would be a starter. And last year had 8 sacks. And so he's a good football player out there on the other side across from Von Miller. So, yeah, the run defense has been really, really good for this Broncos team.
Well, just elaborate a little bit more on that pass rush, because Von Miller did miss last year's game, and that probably did play a role in at least the early thoughts of, well, how people like us thought about the Steelers' offensive line at the time. Just how has the Broncos' pass rush looked like? What are their stats so far? And, well, has there been a team where you could say that they performed well enough that the Steelers should look at their concepts?
Yeah, I the pass rush has been honestly really good. I don't know their exact stats off the top of my head, but I know Von Miller has 4 sacks this year, and he did the Ravens game was the first one he didn't have a sack, and that's mostly because Lamar is just Lamar and escapes those type of things. But they've been really good back there in terms of creating pressure. And one thing that I would watch for is Vic Fangio, the head coach and defensive coordinator. He typically doesn't blitz a whole lot, but he has the past 2 games. He's brought Alexander Johnson, the inside linebacker, on a couple blitzes that got home against the Jets. He had 2 sacks against the Jets. Shelby Harris also had a sack against the Jets. And then this last game, they did something interesting. They would run a dime package where they had 6 DBs, and they'd bring in rookie safety Caden Stearns from Texas, and they brought him on a blitz twice, and he got home both times and sacked Lamar Jackson twice on those 2 plays. So typically Fangio, like by the percentages, does not blitz that often. But the last 2 games, he's really been bringing it. And I don't know if that's a product of, some other guys aren't getting home or whatever. And so you bring an extra guy to try and, create those one-on-one matchups up front. But I would not be surprised if they did some of that stuff against the Steelers, especially when you consider, how immobile Ben Roethlisberger's been through this season. I think that's definitely something you could see where they bring a little extra pressure to try and, obviously force some of those sacks.
In the secondary, just looking at it on paper, the Broncos have a lot of talent, and it all starts with free safety Justin Simmons, who is one of the best in the game. He's paired with veteran Kareem Jackson at strong safety, and then the corners are rookie Patrick Surtain, the second, and Kyle Fuller. How has the secondary been so far this season, and how has Surtain looked?
Yeah, it's been up and down. I would say obviously more ups than down. Like you said, they're super talented back there, and they're also going to get, assumedly, they're going to get Ronald Darby, who also starts at corner. He started the first game at corner and got a hamstring injury against the Giants. He should return to practice this week, and I would bet he starts. And my guess is that he starts over Fuller, who, if there's one weakness in this secondary, it's probably been Fuller. Fuller's given up some plays. You even look at but you also look at the Ravens game, and those safeties that you mentioned had a couple busts. Hollywood Brown, had the big 50-yard touchdown catch where Kareem Jackson actually got beat behind him. And then Justin Simmons, wasn't able to, shut down Mark Andrews like I think they had hoped. Mark Andrews had a pretty big game, and Justin Simmons mostly drew that job. So there's definitely some weaknesses in it, but they're one of the more talented secondaries. And you look at Surtain as a rookie, I think he's been playing great. And I think that, again, I think he's going to end up earning that starting spot. Right now, he's basically only in there because of Darby's injury. But now I think that he's earned it. And so I wouldn't be shocked if, Darby comes back and Fuller actually goes to the bench. Then the other one is Bryce Callahan. You'll see a lot of him, number 29. He plays the nickelback position and will come in on third downs. And same with Caden Stearns. Caden Stearns will play quite a bit at that dime spot.
All right, who you think is going to have a big game for Denver this week?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of, I don't know, on offense. I think it's going to be the tight ends and running backs, and I said that last week, and it ended up, sort of being true on offense, if you can say they had any bright spots last week. But I think that they're going to continue to emphasize getting the ball to guys like Noah Fant and Devonte Williams. I think Devonte Williams is a guy that you just got to keep giving him the ball, and I think they went away from that too much last week, where it looked like he was going to have a big breakout game, and then they just stopped giving it to him. And so I think they're going to stick with that this week. I think Fangio kind of echoed that yesterday in his press conference about sticking with the run. And then on defense, I think it's going to be the pass rush. I think Von Miller, you're looking at a day that he could maybe have, 2 sacks, which, if he gets 2 sacks, those could be game changers. He's yet to have strip sack, which he's known for in the league, obviously in his 11 seasons playing in the NFL. So, if I had to pick one guy on the defense, I know it's the easy pick, right, in Von Miller, but I would probably roll with Von on defense.
And also, what's your biggest concern for the Broncos in this game?
Well, I think it's got to be quarterback, right? I mean, if Teddy Bridgewater can't go, and this is nothing against Drew, and I think Drew's a great guy, and I think he has some skills, but I think that I just have little faith in Drew to go on the road in that type of environment and in a must-win game for the Steelers and lead, big offensive drives. We saw it last week. He got in the game. He finally got his opportunity, right, this season, and he kind of squandered it. And so I think that's the biggest concern. I think the offensive line is another concern when you consider what the Steelers have up front. Can they protect whoever is that quarterback? Because they weren't able to do that last week against the Ravens with either guy in there. And then defensively, I think I got to point towards the secondary because they did show some flaws this last week against the Ravens, and they were able to shut down that run game of the Ravens. But, Lamar threw for, I think it was like 320 yards through the air and a touchdown. So I think that's those are the two concerns. And the third side of the ball that we always forget to talk about, right? Special teams. And the Broncos have been one of the worst teams in the league in terms of special teams. And in fact, this last week, they gave up that huge punt return right before the half. They ended up letting the Ravens go up 2 scores right before halftime, and it changed the whole, aspect of the game in terms of what the Broncos wanted to do offensively and defensively. They had to force the issue. So they've been really bad on special teams. So that could end up also being a deciding factor in this game if they can't clean up some of those problems there.
And Drew, do you have a prediction for the game?
Yeah, I don't think you guys will like it or your listeners, but I do think the Broncos, I'm betting on Teddy Bridgewater playing, so I picked the Broncos like 21-17. I think it's a really close game. Obviously, like you guys said, the Steelers need to win this game. I think that's pretty well known. And I was actually talking to Brooke Pryor, who covers the Steelers for ESPN, and she's a good friend of mine. And she was talking about that, about how much of this is a big needed win for Pittsburgh. So, it would not shock me at all. I think Pittsburgh is like a 1.5 point favorite maybe right now. Would not shock me at all if they won that. And again, I think it's going to largely depend on who's playing quarterback in my opinion. But I'll take the Broncos, 21-17.
For the Steelers' sake, this game being at home might be a positive, as the Steelers are 1-5 under Mike Tomlin when facing the Broncos in Denver. Steelers have won their last 2 games against Denver and Heinz Field. Overall, they're 3-5 against the Broncos under Tomlin. And Ben Roethlisberger is 4-6 in his career against the Broncos. Steelers have won played the Broncos 8 times in the playoffs, with Denver winning 5 of them. Is the Tim Tebow game still talked about in Denver? Because the Steelers fans sure do remember it like it was yesterday.
That's a good question. I'm coming up on only 1 year, covering the Broncos. I joined last November, but I can definitely say that they still talk about that game. But I can also tell you that the Broncos don't really look back fondly on the Tebow years. While they may have had that one great play, I think a lot of Broncos fans were pretty happy that Peyton Manning came in those next 4 seasons. But it's definitely one of those things that obviously gets replayed all the time, and especially when it comes up on the anniversary. Which is it the 10-year anniversary this upcoming year? I'm sure that'll be brought up a lot this year. But yes, it's definitely brought up. But I know that a lot of Broncos fans are like, oh yeah, Tebow. Those weren't the best years for the Broncos.
Really? Huh.
I think it was fun for everybody else around the league. You mentioned Peyton Manning, another thing that you guys could potentially have on the wayside. I know that at least on the McAfee show, it's been more the Steelers as a possibility and the little wink from Aaron Rodgers, but the Broncos have as much as a right for Aaron Rodgers as the Steelers do. And also, he did mention that he wanted to play closer to LA, and in case you don't know, Denver is not that far away from LA. So is there a possibility, at least, that John Elway can pull one more magic trick and get another quarterback just at the end of his career trying to get one more Super Bowl?
Yeah, it's interesting. Elway, I think everybody expects him. Obviously he stepped down this last year, but he's still pretty much involved because he's I think his official title is president of football operations. And so now it's George Payton from Minnesota there at the GM position, but Elway is in all those talks. But anyways, I think it's definitely a possibility. I mean, I think that those rumors that were speculating back in April around the draft, those were very much real. I think that there was a real interest, obviously from the Broncos side. But I do think there was some interest from Aaron Rodgers, and it'll be interesting to see, what ends up happening with that after the season. I think, I think it's safe to say he's not going to be playing for the Packers next year. And I think he is going to have a list that he wants to play. And it would not be surprising if Denver's at the top of that list. But at the same time, it really depends on what the Broncos do this year, right? If the Broncos go out and they flop, right, and they're not very good this season, I think if I'm Aaron Rodgers, maybe I go to an organization like the Steelers that are always competitive. They've been competitive. They have, some great wide receivers already there, a great running back. I think they need to figure out some things on the offensive line. And I think some of those same things can be said about the Broncos, right? They've got some young wide receivers that are pretty good, but if they go out and they flop, and that's the thing about the Broncos too, that's really interesting this year, is they've got a ton of guys that their contracts are up at the end of this year that are good players. And if they end up not performing and they end up not being competitive this season, a lot of those guys are probably going to look for different places that they can go win a Super Bowl or be at least a contender. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the Broncos do. And let's say they succeed, right? Let's say they go out and they have a great season. They make the playoffs and Teddy Bridgewater continues to be a really good quarterback. Do they extend him? Do they sign him to a contract and say, you know what, we're going to stick with Teddy instead of going out and trying, their odds in the free agent market or making a trade or whatever it may be. So it's definitely an interesting situation for the Broncos. But if Aaron Rodgers is available, I think there's probably 30 teams that'll be calling on him, but I'm sure the Broncos will be on that list.
One more thing. Have you been hearing a lot about Paxton Lynch? He was on the practice squad for the Steelers, and we asked Ryan Edwards this exact same question last year, and man, he had a bunch to say about Paxton Lynch.
Yeah, I wasn't here for Paxton's years, but I can tell you people do not I talked about Tebow. Man, they do not like Paxton Lynch. And I say that I don't think they don't like Paxton Lynch, the player. Obviously, the person, I'm sure it's whatever. But they definitely don't look fondly back on that pick for sure. That's one that often comes up. That and picking Bradley Chubb instead of Josh Allen there in the 2018 draft. I think a lot of Broncos fans are upset about that. But yeah, Paxton Lynch is not a guy that gets talked about often, and when he does, it's not very good things.
And George, you mentioned the Ravens going for the most consecutive games with over 100 yards rushing. And Vic Fangio, he wasn't too happy with John Harbaugh after the game. Can you explain to our listeners maybe who didn't see that or didn't hear about it, what all happened there at the end of the game?
Yeah, so it was interesting because it was 23-7, and the Broncos had the ball for the last 2 minutes of the game, really, and they were trying to score. They probably were not coming back, but that was what their goal was. They called 3 timeouts the final minute to stop the clock. They end up throwing an interception with 3 seconds left. The Ravens have the ball, and they have 97 yards rushing. They've rushed for, like I said, I think it's 43 times or 42 times, and they're trying to keep that record alive of rushing for over 100 yards. So they run a little sweep to the left with Lamar, and the Broncos were lined up like they were going to take a knee. And Vic Fangio, there's a video of him on the sideline just dog cussing the Ravens and telling his players to get up to try and stop him, and they didn't realize what was going on. Lamar gets 5 yards. They get 102 yards for the game. They keep the record alive. And then obviously on Monday, him and Fangio and Harbaugh kind of went back and forth at their own individual press conferences. Fangio came out and said it was BS, were his exact words, and that he thought that the Ravens as an organization, I think the wording was something along the lines of player safety is secondary at that organization. So it was pretty harsh words. And then obviously Harbaugh came out and said, well, I don't know why they were, throwing into the end zone with no time left, down 16 points or whatever it was. And so it was a pretty interesting back and forth. And what's really interesting about the two is, they coached together in Baltimore back in, I think it was 2008, 2009. And then Fangio ended up leaving to go be the defensive coordinator at Stanford for his brother, Jim, and then ended up being his, Jim's defensive coordinator for the 49ers for a few years. So I think there's a little bit of a rivalry there. So it was definitely an interesting situation. And I kind of hope they end up both making the playoffs. Maybe they play in a wild card game. That'd be a lot of fun because there was a lot of words shared on Monday, especially.
All right. Speaking of Fangio, 1 to 10, what is this hot seat rating right now?
Well, I think he's got to win. And what I mean by that, I think he has to have a winning season at least, right? He's got to go at least 9-8, in my opinion. And that may not even be enough, right? If this team underachieves, I think a lot of people think 10 wins is what they should get to, especially after starting 3-0. I think that's kind of where I set it at, is he's got to get to 10 wins and maybe he has to make the playoffs. And I know that's really tough, especially in the AFC. I think there's some really good football teams in the AFC right now, and especially in the AFC West. I mean, you watched that game last night between the Chargers and Raiders. I think the Chargers are legit, man. I think that they're a team that can compete with the Chiefs. Obviously, they beat the Chiefs a couple of weeks ago. You look at obviously, the Browns and I think the Steelers are still a good football team. The Ravens. There's all these good football teams in the AFC, right? So making the playoffs is going to be tough, but I think a lot of people are saying, he's got to at least get to 9 wins, if not 10, to probably keep his job. And what's interesting, they have a new GM. So really, we have no idea what the new GM really thinks of Fangio. Obviously, he supports him right now, but does he want to go out and bring in his own guy next season and kind of get a restart button for this organization next season?
And George, leading up to the interview, I was doing some research and I saw that you covered Oklahoma when Baker Mayfield was there. So I was wondering, since he is in the AFC North, what was it like covering Mayfield there when he was at Oklahoma?
Baker's great. I'm sure Steelers fans don't like him, but Baker, in terms of personality and just him as a guy, I got to know him pretty well, and he's just a really solid dude, good person. Obviously, the type of player that I think that if he's on your team, you love him. If he's not, you hate him. That kind of personality, but a guy that guys really rally around. I think he's a good quarterback. He didn't play well this last week, against the Vikings, and I think he still has some issues in terms of what he can do and what he can't do. But I think he's in the right system there in Cleveland, and obviously that's a big part of it, right? In today's age, quarterbacks need to be in the right system unless you're a Pat Mahomes, right? So, he's a good dude, and I've gotten to know him and his family, pretty well. And then, even Kyler, I got to know Kyler actually probably better than Baker. And he's obviously tearing it up with the Cardinals right now. But, and I know Norwood's playing for the Steelers. That's my guy. I love Trey. Trey's a good guy. And, I remember I covered him his first 3 years, and, he stood out as a freshman. I remember he came in and started as a freshman those last few games. When Baker was there, actually, and then went to the playoff, and he was a good player. And he had an injury, I want to say his sophomore year, maybe junior year, he had ACL injury, and obviously he's turned out to be a good player, and was really, really good for them last year, playing sort of that nickel position, just a ball hawk. And sounds like he's playing quite a bit for the Steelers. I haven't kept up with him as much, but he's a good guy, and I'm wishing him best of luck too.
What's it like being in that Denver atmosphere? What are the fans like in Denver? I know we asked the guy from the Packers last week, so I'm asking you because I know that's a crazy home field advantage, even though this game's going to be in Pittsburgh. I always wanted to know what that atmosphere is like.
Yeah, it's crazy. Last year being my first real year on the beat, I came in halfway through the year, and it was when they stopped having fans there, so I didn't really get to experience it last year. And through two home games this year, it's been electric, and it's crazy because you sit in that press box there at Empower Field, and it shakes, and it's that loud, and they're really into it. And the Steelers, man, they've got a great fan base too, so I'm excited for that on Sunday. And the other thing I've noticed about the Broncos is they travel well. There'll be quite a few Broncos fans make that trip to Pittsburgh on Sunday, so it'll be interesting to see how many make it to the game. But I know the Steelers have a great fan base too. And another weird connection, one of my best friends, she's a photographer, an intern photographer for the Steelers. We went to school together at OU, Caitlin Epps. And so I'm looking forward to seeing her too. But she said, Steelers Nation is crazy. So, two good fan bases, two great organizations in terms of, you look at their past, the tradition at both those places. I think that obviously goes hand in hand with the type of fans they have.
And that's George Stoia. He covers the Broncos for the Denver Gazette. George, thanks so much for the interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
So if there's one thing that I feel good about, at least over the last Sunday for me, is that I totally predicted the score top to bottom. It was 27-17 Packers over the Steelers. So that's the one thing I'm feeling good about this week going in with the Steelers. And I'm actually still kind of feeling confident in my picks, and I'm going to say this. This is the one game, really the next 2 weeks, I'm still going to pick for the Steelers. From there on out, we're going to go touch and go. So I'm going to say the inverse of George's pick and say 21-17 Steelers. I think they somehow get some late magic in there. That maybe it's the last bit of Roethlisberger magic we'll see for his career, but I know this. He's got everyone in the world against him, and even I'm against it too, and I can't believe I'm picking for him at this point, but still, this is one of the wins that I still had in there this year.
Yeah, if the Steelers don't win this game, I mean, chances of them being 1-6 by Week 9 when they play the Bears on Monday Night Football is really good. I think this is a must-win game for them, and it's just October. Yeah, but I want to have a similar score because I don't think the Steelers' offense is going to put up a lot of points. But I want to say 23-17, the Steelers win. They need this one really bad.
I will say, against my better judgment, because if Bridgewater is able to play, Denver's the better team. If Drew Lock plays, the Steelers are maybe a little bit better at home. It says it's a 1.5 points. I'm going to say the Steelers win, but it's going to be a weird score like 18-16, something like that. Close, low scoring, defensive struggle. I think the defense is going to make a play. Like TJ Watt is going to have a sack fumble on Lock, and then Boswell kicks a field goal to win it.
Yeah, that's a good prediction. And by the way, let me preface my 24-14 pick with I think there's going to be one defensive turnover that results in points, maybe sets them in a place where they're on the goal line and they just cannot, like, literally mess this up unless it's last year's Steelers team.
Yeah, the one thing that made me nervous with George talking about how Denver's run defense is pretty stout because, I mean, if they make the Steelers one-dimensional and, have Von Miller there, I just, that could be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, because he said Denver's offensive line is almost as a suspect as the Steelers. And I think that could make a difference. But depends on line play, offensive line and defensive line play, just like you love, Chris. So whoever plays in the trenches the best will win this game.
It could be a very defensive game, even lower than what I predicted with the 23-17 score. It could, like you mentioned, Brandon, it could be like one of those weird score games.
Somebody gets a safety.
Yeah.
Somebody tries to go for two, misses it, or something like that. But I'm picking the Steelers with some trepidation here.
Well, now I'm going to say the one player that probably makes a difference for the Steelers in this game, and he's been getting a ton of flack from Pro Football Focus, Steeler fans themselves, maybe even the national media. I'm going to say Minkah Fitzpatrick gets a pick 6.
Yeah, that would be huge if he could do that. Especially, the silence the naysayers about him right now. But that's true that what Ron Clark says, like, if Fitzpatrick's not getting his hands on the ball or making some type of impact play, it's just he's really just kind of like a regular free safety back there.
So who you got to make the impact? Who do you think is going to be the man of the match?
Wow. Fitzpatrick's a good one, but I'm going to go with I'll go with Hayward in the trenches there. I think maybe he gets a couple sacks in this game.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say Ben.
Wow.
I'm serious.
Talking all that talk about him, and now you're going to put him on your shoulders.
Hold on.
Big change of events there, Brandon.
Hold up. I'm going by what Ty said. He's done. He's washed up for what he used to be. But Denver I don't know how good Denver really is.
Yeah, they're a weird type of 3-1 because the three teams that they beat, they have a combined record of 2-10. So you really don't know, what they're all about. But we're recording this podcast on Tuesday, and Tomlin during his press conference said that Ben's dealing with a hip issue. So that's something to look out for, coming this week on Sunday. And he was also asked if Ben was the quarterback for this, or he was the best. He was asked if he's the best quarterback for this offense right now, and Tomlin said absolutely. So that's interesting there because people are wondering if they should put out Rudolph and Haskins in that quarterback.
So Steelers versus Broncos this weekend, 1 p.m. on Fox. And again, we'd like to thank Bill Steinbach for helping us out with the new intro, outro, and also podcast clip intro. You can check out his show, the A-Main Podcast. He covers racing and racing of all forms in Pennsylvania, NASCAR as well. And again, It's one of those great podcasts out there. Just seeing some of the tweets off of his account and all that stuff, he's really created a following. And if you like motorsports and Western Pennsylvania motorsports, you'll definitely love that. But meanwhile, that's all for us here. For Chris Ward and Brandon Walker, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at @RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. Read articles on renegadeblitz.com, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. The Renegade Blitz podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you can listen to podcasts.